Do you love a good dungeon crawl? Do you want a story-driven campaign with branching paths and over 20 hours of content? Do you want a game with RPG elements that you can really sink your teeth into? Well, if that describes you, you'll want to stick around because this is Eldfall Chronicles Northern Wind. Eldfall Chronicles Northern Wind is a standalone expansion to the Eldfall Chronicles base game. While the base game is a skirmish battle game, Northern Wind is more of a dungeon crawling adventure. But what makes the Eldfall Chronicles series so exciting is the base mechanics and systems are the same in both titles. This means that most of the components and rules from one game can be seamlessly integrated into the other. As mentioned before, Northern Wind is a cooperative dungeon crawling adventure. Players will work through a full narrative story campaign with twists and turns and branching paths over multiple storylines with over 20 hours of gameplay. And you can expect even more if you explore every branching storyline, all of the different side quests, and picking apart every secret. And even more once you also consider the different party configurations when you include the models from the base game as well, because they are fully compatible with Northern Wind. A Northern Wind campaign plays out across a series of quests represented by battling through dungeon crawling adventures. But Northern Wind is much more than just your typical dungeon crawler. Expect something closer to a full RPG experience. Each character has stamina, which determines the number of activation points they get each turn, speed, which notes how far they can move on their turn, armor is used to prevent incoming damage, and of course, hit points. But there are also stats like offense and defense for melee attacks, accuracy for ranged attacks, intellect for spellcasting, agility for dodging, and their toughness and morale. This highlights just how crunchy Northern Wind can be. It really is a full RPG experience in a board game. And along the way, your characters will level up, unlock new abilities, find new items, and become more powerful as they take on tougher enemies. When you're playing a particularly strategic game, one pitfall many of them can run into is too much downtime between turns. Fortunately, the Eldfall Chronicles series in general uses an action-reaction sort of gameplay. So even when it's not your turn, you're still engaging with the game. For example, when an enemy declares an attack on you, you can spend one of your activation points to react, and also perform an attack or a dodge, or any other of the normal actions. This action-reaction system means you've always got options on how the turn will play out, even when it's not your turn. That is, until you've spent all your activation tokens. So don't spend them all too early, and don't hold on to them for too long. It's a system which allows for highly tactical and strategic combat without becoming overly complicated. Like with any good RPG, actions require rolling a d20. No matter if you're attacking, dodging, casting spells, the process is the same. Each action will have an associated stat which is used to make the attribute check, like offense for making an attack roll. Simply roll equal to or less than the listed number and that's it. Of course, various items, buffs, and status effects can affect your stats and rolls, but ultimately that's all there is to making an attribute check. But Northern Wind remains true to its wargaming roots, and even after a model lands a hit, they must still roll to damage the target, similar to some other tabletop games you might be familiar with. And there are a bunch of different status effects. Of course, you got your staples like poisoned, weakened, blinded, or bleeding, but there are more interesting ones like confused, panicked, or shrouded, and possibly the worst status effect of them all. But there are other things you might not necessarily consider as status effects, like flying, which, among other things, prevents being targeted by melee attacks except by other flying models. Or you could be crouched, which reduces the range at which a model can be targeted by ranged attacks, but also reduces their ability to make melee attacks. In your typical RPG, these actions make sense, but you rarely see them in board games. And this is a great example of the level of detail you can expect to see while playing Northern Wind. And there are plenty other mechanics to look at as well, like spellcasting, being engaged in melee, line of sight, inventory management, and plenty more. you can head on over to their Kickstarter page for all the details. Eldfall Chronicles Northern Wind is currently live on Kickstarter with a few days left to go. They hit their funding goal in 30 minutes and are blazing past their stretch goals, and it's easy to see why. This is a game with a well-tested foundation, since it's based on the core Eldfall Chronicles system. If you're the sort of player who likes games that lean into those RPG mechanics and systems with a touch of wargaming on top, you'll definitely want to check out Eldfall Chronicles Northern Wind.